The Giza necropolis is a planned project. It isn't just pharaohs who came and put their pyramids haphazardly and then built the Sphinx.
Everyone is calling this pyramid theory the answer, the missing ramps, the missing tools, the missing construction debris. All of it, supposedly explained by one clean idea.
One has to ask the question, well, what was wiped out?
The Egyptians didn't leave the evidence behind because the evidence was never meant to stay there.
It's considered a national security threat to our government if the truth is told.
They built temporary structures, used them, stripped them down, and reused the stone somewhere else. It sounds brilliant, almost too brilliant. Because the second a theory explains every missing piece of evidence, you have to ask a very uncomfortable question. Is it solving the mystery, or is it just making the missing evidence impossible to disprove? That's the strange thing about the pyramids. The less evidence we find, the more powerful some theories become. And this new idea may be the best example of that.
If you have a straight ramp, which is leading up to the Great Pyramid, if it's going to carry blocks right up to what will be the top of the Great Pyramid.
To understand why, we have to start with the one thing almost every pyramid theory has in common. They all have a missing body. Not a person, a ramp. For thousands of years, people have looked at the Great Pyramid and asked the same basic question. How do you move millions of stone blocks upward without modern machines? The simple answer is ramps.
Now, Egyptologists will tell you that, they could move heavy blocks because they put them on wet sand and they push them along on wet sand. Well, maybe if you're just at ground level, that will do. But when you're 350 feet above the ground, as you are in the King's Chamber, that won't do at all.
Drag the blocks up a ramp as the pyramid rises. Easy enough. Except when you actually think about the size of the thing. The Great Pyramid was around 146 meters tall when finished, and it contained roughly 2.3 million blocks of stone. Wikipedia. So if you build one huge ramp to reach the top, that ramp has to be enormous. Not just a little dirt path, a whole second construction project. You would need a ramp big enough to move multi-ton stones.
No gang of workers can haul a 20-ton block up a slope that's steeper than 10 degrees. So you're looking at a ramp which is going to extend roughly a mile out into the desert.
Gentle enough for workers to use, strong enough not to collapse, and long enough to reach the upper levels. And then, once the pyramid is done, that ramp has to disappear, which is where things get weird. Because if a massive external ramp existed, where did it go? That missing ramp is the crack in the story. And this new theory walks right into that crack and says something very tempting. Maybe the ramp didn't disappear, maybe it was recycled, and if that's true, then the missing evidence isn't a problem anymore. It's the whole point.
These are cold cases. It's maybe the coldest robbery case in the books.
But before we decide that this solves the pyramid, we need to look at why people are so hungry for this answer in the first place. Because the pyramids are not just old buildings, they are old in a way that almost breaks your sense of time. Cleopatra lived closer to the iPhone than she did to the building of the Great Pyramid. Ancient tourists were already visiting these monuments when they were ancient.
The workforce that was needed to lift these stones must have been massive. According to ancient Greek and Roman historians, it is suggested that it was a labor workforce of around 100,000 enslaved people.
And over that much time, normal evidence doesn't just fade. It gets reused, buried, looted, misread, turned into something else. That's what makes the pyramid such perfect ground for strange ideas. But here's the part people forget. Ancient Egypt was not some small, confused civilization guessing its way through history. They had organization, food surplus, skilled workers, surveying knowledge, religious motivation, bureaucracy, long-term planning. The Nile flooded every year, and that helped create the kind of surplus that could feed huge labor crews who weren't farming full-time. And at Giza, archaeologists found evidence of workers' settlements, bakeries, workshops, and support systems. These were not just random people dragging rocks because someone yelled at them. They were organized labor crews working inside a massive state system.
Lifted those stones, how they brought them up to that level. I think we're looking, again, at a lost technology. And it was this ancient apocalypse 12,800 years ago that wiped that.
We even have the Diary of Mera, a logbook from a crew leader who recorded transporting limestone by boat to the pyramid site. That is the strange part. We have records of stone being moved. We have evidence of workers. We have evidence of organization, but we do not have the clean construction manual. No ancient drawing that says, here is exactly how we raised the blocks.
Part of large megalithic blocks is going to be utterly obliterated by the time the process is through.
So every theory has to fill in the silence. And the newest theory does it in a very clever way. It says the silence is not a gap. It is a design feature. The idea goes something like this. What if the Egyptians did not build the pyramid with one giant ramp that sat outside the structure? What if they built a temporary construction mass around or within the project? A rough working shape, a kind of oversized stone machine. Then, once the pyramid reached its height, they carved it down, reused the extra stone, and erased the construction system as part of the process. In other words, the pyramid was not simply built, it was shaped, almost like a statue hiding inside a block of stone. That is why this theory feels so powerful. It explains the missing debris. It explains why no giant ramp remains. It explains how workers could keep access to the top. And it fits something we already know about ancient Egypt.
There is no doubt that large numbers of strong men can haul very large blocks of stone on the level.
They reused things. Later dynasties took stone from older monuments. Old structures became quarries. Sacred buildings were repaired, stripped, rebuilt, and repurposed. So the idea that the Egyptians would recycle construction material does not sound crazy. It sounds very human. But that is where the trap begins. Because sounds human is not the same as prove. And this is where we have to challenge the theory. If all the evidence was removed by design, then what evidence could ever prove the theory wrong? That is the dangerous part. A strong theory makes predictions. It says, if I am right, we should find this. A weaker theory says, if we don't find anything, that proves I'm right too. And that is where this new pyramid idea starts walking a thin line.
Egyptologists feel confident in saying that it was the work of Khufu, because in that top chamber there is what is known as a royal cartouche.
Because it may explain the missing evidence, but it also risks becoming protected by the missing evidence. And once a theory becomes impossible to test, it stops acting like archaeology and starts acting like a story. But there's another problem. The pyramid is not just a pile of stone, it is a precision object. The base is extremely square, the sides are carefully aligned. The whole structure points almost perfectly toward true north. That matters because any construction theory has to explain more than lifting rocks. It has to explain precision. You can move blocks all day long, but if your angles drift, the top will betray you. The apex is the nightmare. At the bottom, a tiny mistake looks tiny. At the top, that same mistake becomes huge. This is why many pyramid theories work beautifully for the first half. Then they start falling apart near the top. An external ramp blocks the sides and corners you need to check.
Furthermore, that ramp is going to have to bear the load of very heavy megaliths to be carried up. Therefore, the ramp itself has got to be extremely strong in order to carry that load.
A spiral ramp wrapped around the outside creates access problems. An internal ramp gives you another issue. Where are the clear traces? This is why Jean-Pierre Houdin's internal ramp theory became so famous. It tried to solve the ramp problem by putting part of the ramp inside the pyramid. A short external ramp may have helped build the lower part. Then an internal spiral ramp may have carried blocks higher. It is elegant. But then modern scanning complicated the picture. The Scan Pyramids project used muon imaging, basically particles from space passing through the pyramid, to look for hidden spaces without damaging the structure. In 2017, researchers announced a large unexplained void above the Grand Gallery. Its purpose is still unknown. That discovery gave everyone new fuel. Some saw it as evidence of hidden construction spaces. Others saw it as proof that we still have no idea what's inside this thing. But here's the problem. A big void is not automatically a ramp. A hidden space is not automatically a construction system. And scattered mysteries do not automatically add up to one clean answer. That is the part that gets lost online. People see a void and immediately turn it into whatever theory they already like. Internal ramp people see a ramp clue. Lost technology people see lost technology. Mystery channels see a thumbnail. But the pyramid does not care about our favorite explanation.
Ones inside the pyramids, they're offering you names, they're offering you dates, they're offering you legacies of the pharaohs, who the rulers were, they're talking about the afterlife a little bit, but in terms of why these pyramids were built, we don't seem to have that information.
It only gives us stone, and stone is stubborn. So let's go back to this newer idea, the missing evidence theory. It says the ramps, working platforms, and temporary construction trades were intentionally removed, recycled, or absorbed into the final system. That would explain why archaeologists keep finding almost everything except the one thing everyone wants. But it creates a second question. If the Egyptians were so careful to erase construction evidence, why did they leave other evidence behind? Why do we have worker areas? Why do we have quarry marks? Why do we have records of transportation? Why would the construction method be erased, but the entire support system enough for us to reconstruct parts of it? Maybe the answer is simple. Maybe the construction materials were valuable, so they reused them. Maybe there was no sacred cleanup plan. Maybe they were just practical. But then the theory becomes less dramatic. It's no longer, they hid the evidence. They reused useful stone. And that is a very different claim. One is a complete explanation.
Built the level of technological sophistication far in excess of anything that we have today.
The other is a normal human behavior. This matters because a good documentary mystery should not just ask, could this be true? I should ask, what would have to be true for this to work? For this theory to work, a lot has to line up. The temporary construction mass has to be large enough to help build the pyramid. It has to allow workers to move huge blocks safely. It has to preserve the exact geometry of the final pyramid. It has to explain the missing debris. And then it has to disappear into the next phase of construction without leaving obvious scars. That's not impossible, but it's a lot. And the more a theory explains, the more careful we have to be. Because sometimes a theory explains everything. Because it sometimes explains everything because it is flexible. That brings us to the most uncomfortable part of the pyramid mystery. Maybe we keep looking for one method when there was never one method. Maybe the Egyptians used different systems at different heights. A straight ramp for lower levels, levers and sledges for certain blocks, temporary platforms, rubble fill, internal passages, work crews coming from multiple sides, reused material, and a final finishing process that cleaned away most of the mess. That sounds less exciting than one grand hidden system, but it might be closer to how humans actually build.
Some of the things that our ancient ancestors were up to. And maybe this would be worth a whole show in itself.
Big projects are rarely solved by one perfect trick. They are solved by layers of boring genius. Planning, labor, food, timing, measurement, experiment, mistakes, corrections. The Great Pyramid may not be the product of one secret method. It may be the product of a civilization that had enough time, stability, and organization to solve hundreds of smaller problems. And that possibility is almost more impressive because it means the answer was not magic, it was management. Still, the missing evidence theory does something valuable. It forces us to stop thinking of the pyramid as a frozen monument and start thinking of it as a construction site. A living site, a noisy site, a place full of dust, rope, sledges, ramps, teams, foremen, deliveries, mistakes, repairs, and decisions. Not a perfect object appearing in the desert, a machine that slowly turned labor into geometry. And if you look at it that way, the missing evidence feels different. Maybe it isn't missing because someone covered it up. Maybe it's missing because construction sites are temporary by nature. Nobody preserves the scaffolding. Nobody keeps the formwork. Nobody builds a monument and leaves the ladders attached. The finished pyramid was the point. Everything else was just the path to get there. But this is also where we should be honest. The theory does not fully solve the mystery. It gives us a possible reason why the evidence is gone, but it does not give us the exact day-by-day construction method. It does not show the complete ramp. It does not prove the full system. It gives us a better question. What if the evidence wasn't lost by accident? What if the construction process was always meant to be consumed by the final monument? That is a powerful idea.
Would be ensure that whatever investigation took place did not damage or destroy anything of great importance. This is something that's not often realized about excavations. When you excavate a site, you effectively destroy that site.
Maybe even a useful one, but useful does not mean final. Because the pyramid has survived for thousands of years by doing one thing better than almost any structure on Earth. It refuses to explain itself. Every generation arrives with new tools. Greek historians, Victorian explorers, modern archaeologists, muon scanners, computer models, YouTube documentaries. And every generation thinks it is close. Then the pyramid gives us one more void, one more missing ramp, one more stone that doesn't quite fit the theory, and suddenly the answer moves again. So maybe this new theory explains the missing evidence, or maybe it explains why we are so desperate for the evidence to be missing. Because a clean answer feels good. It closes the loop. It turns the pyramid from a mystery into a machine. But maybe the truth is messier. Maybe the Egyptians did not use one secret method. Maybe they used a whole construction language we only understand in broken words. A ramp here, a platform there, a reused block somewhere else. A trick that worked for the bottom, a different trick that worked near the top. And after 4,500 years, we are trying to reconstruct the whole sentence from a few surviving letters. That is why this theory matters. Not because it proves everything, but because it reminds us that absence is not always emptiness. Sometimes the thing we cannot find is gone because it failed to survive. Sometimes it is gone because it was reused. And sometimes it is gone because we were looking for the wrong kind of evidence in the first place. The Great Pyramid may never give us the clean answer we want. But maybe that is why it still works. Not as a tomb, not just as a monument, but as a machine for producing wonder. And after all this time, the most impressive thing about it may not be that ancient Egyptians built it. It's that they built something so well that thousands of years later, we are still standing in front of it, trying to figure out where the evidence went.